Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vardhan, and I'm very excited to be here on Edureka Live with you guys. And as you all know, today's session is going to be completely about what is a DNS server and how to set it up in your machine. So do stay until the end of the session if you want to learn how to set up a bind DNS server in 10 simple steps. So I'm teaching you this topic on DNS based on several requests that I received from participants in my previous session. This is something I've not covered before, and it's really exciting because setting up a DNS server is the biggest headache Linux admins face, so much so that a lot of them shy away from this task. But the thing with DNS is that it has to be configured only once, and after that there's no need to edit any settings unless some kind of network is down because of some issue, right? So that's the only reason you will have to again change your DNS settings, but otherwise it's a one-time task. But there again, it's a very challenging task for even doing it the first time. So that's about DNS. And before I get started, I want to first of all know how many of you people are aware of what a DNS is. Can you people tell me that by commenting in the comment box? Okay, see guys, the thing is, some of you might know what it is, some of you might not know what it is. But anyways, the thing is, I will explain what DNS is, and then I will discuss the 10 simple steps to configuring a bind DNS server. Okay, I will give you an introduction and then I'll do that. And of course, I'll give you a demonstration at the end. And I can get started with my session, and I'll first of all show you this customary agenda slide of mine. And for the sake of the newcomers, like I told you earlier, I will go through what is DNS, and I'll then talk about how a DNS server works, and then how it will look for the various servers in the DNS root hierarchy. How will it look for a particular IP address from that domain, and how will it look for an IP address of a system which is in a completely different geography, right? So all those things, I'll tell you how that works, and then finally I'll give you a 10-step detailed explanation of the 10 steps that are needed to configure a DNS server. Okay, so the first topic for today is, what is DNS? Well, DNS stands for Domain Name System, and its main responsibility is to translate internet domain and the host names to IP addresses and vice versa. Well, most of you might know that every physical machine connected to the internet is identified by an IP address. But most of you might not know that these IPs are unique only inside that same domain. Right, and another fact that you might not be aware of is that when you type in a URL in your web browser, then it automatically gets converted to the equivalent IP address of that server which you're trying to access. Supposing you're trying to access google.com, then when you type in google.com in your browser, then it would be automatically converted to Google's IP address, right? And only based on the IP address is the system able to fetch Google's server and display, give you the results on your screen. Well, can anybody tell me why that happens? Why do we do that? Why is there an internal conversion into an IP address that happens? Can anybody guess why that happens? Well, that is because the URL or the fully qualified domain names like google.com, facebook.com, yahoo.com, all these .coms, right? These are the addresses of any server or machine on the internet, okay? And they are, however, only easy to remember by the humans, only for us. For computers, however, it's easier to remember. For them, it's easier to remember in the form of IP addresses. So whatever we have, google.com has an equivalent IP address. Facebook.com has another equivalent IP address. So every single site and every single URL has an equivalent IP address, right? They would be hosted on a server, and to access that server, you have to access that server's IP address. So that's how things work in the background. And yeah, so this task of translating between the IP addresses and the domain names is what is done by this tool called DNS. Okay, so the domain name system does that, and well, it's a big benefit, and people nowadays might not realize the thing. Okay, any newcomers might not know, because without the invention of DNS, our lives would have been very difficult, because back in the 80s, 90s, at that time when we didn't have the DNS, then if we had to access each and every website, with the help of just by giving the host name. So for example, if I wanted to access google.com back in the 80s or 90s, right, instead of giving the IP address, if I had to give the say google.com, then I have to specify this in the hosts file. Okay, I have to map the IP address and the host name in the host file. And doing that today seems a very tedious task, because we have so many websites and we have so many IP addresses which we have to manually feed, and this is a manual task, right? So to eliminate this overhead, we came up with DNS, and boy, now it's a very big help, and a lot of our effort is saved. So that's the thing. And talking of how DNS works, it works on a concept which is very similar to a client or a server network communication architecture. Okay, so here our systems will be the DNS client. Okay, now supposing I'm accessing internet, then I would be a DNS client first of all, and then I'll be sending these requests to the server. Okay, I'll be sending the request to the DNS server by specifying the host name. If I type in google.com in my URL in my web browser, then that host name would go to DNS server. The DNS server would resolve google.com to a particular IP address. Similarly, if I type any other website like facebook.com or yahoo.com, DNS server would do the task of converting that host name into its equivalent IP address and then give back that IP address to us. Okay, and the very act of sending a request is called a lookup request. Okay, and what you get back from the DNS server in the form of an IP address, that's called a lookup response. So these are the two things that are involved, and wherever you configure the DNS server, in whichever environment or whichever machine, that's generally called a DNS server. Okay, it can even be a running environment. And similarly, every system that tries to access that particular server, that they are called DNS clients. So we don't have much of a configuration to do from the DNS client side, but of course DNS server side we have a lot of configuration to do. Excuse me, guys. Yeah, so that's about this example. And another thing that I want to show you is that this concept of DNS lookup request. Okay, now if you see this image over here, you can see that over here I've specified lookup request and lookup response. Okay, but over here this DNS client is making a request in the form of an IP address, right? And then the server is giving back the DNS response in the form of a fully qualified domain name. So in my case, dns.vardhan.com is a fully qualified domain name that I have set for my demonstration on this system of mine. Okay, on this virtual machine. Now you might ask the question, why am I specifying IP address? Now that's because the fact that, of course, you people know, right? You can either enter the IP address or the host name. So to represent that, I've entered this. And when you enter the host name into your web browser, and when the server gets back to you with the IP address, then that's called a forward lookup. Okay, so it resolves the host name or the domain name to the IP address. Whereas the reverse lookup, this one resolves the IP address to the host name. So in this case, when I send an IP address, supposing I know the IP address of a machine, but I don't know the host name or the domain name, then in that case, what I get back, the lookup response I get back from the server, that would be a reverse lookup, right? So there can be two kinds of ways in which you can access and look up. So these are the two things with respect to DNS. Now the question that can arise in your mind is that where does the DNS server get the IP addresses of the host name, right? You can ask that from where, how, if there are so many websites, if there are so many domain names, if there are so many IP addresses for those systems inside a particular domain, how would our DNS server access that particular IP address or that particular server? You can ask me that question. And to explain that question is what I'm going to explain in this next slide, right? So here, first of all, we have a local system. Now let's assume it's me. Okay, I'm trying to access a new website, okay, which is a very new website. So, or let's ignore the fact that it's a new website. Let's just consider that we are going to try to access google.com. Okay, so when we try to access google.com, then that request would first of all go to a resolver. Okay, now the resolver is nothing but your ISP server, and it's basically built into your network operating system. And the IP address of google.com would be built inside resolver. Okay, it would be present as cache memory, and since the IP address would be present, the host name would be resolved and the response would come back to you. But in case if there's a new website which has been newly published, and if that IP address is not in your resolver, what happens? Google.com is famous. right? But google.com is, there's no guarantee that the website that you're talking about has been accessed by someone in your ISP and it's not there in your DNS cache. What would happen at that time? So at that time, the entire we have a different root hierarchy of DNS, right? So those would be accessed. Now that's where the whole concept of DNS comes into the picture, and that's where we have, first of all, something called as the root server. Okay, now the root server sits at the top of the DNS hierarchy. Okay, and there are about 13 sets of these root servers placed strategically around the world, and about 12 organizations access these. They control these root servers. And the thing with these root servers is that they will not tell you exactly which IP address your host name is resolved to. Okay, if you specify vartan.com, it's not going to return back with the IP address of that particular domain. What the root server will do is it will point you to another server. Okay, and that is called the top level domain servers, also called TLD servers. Okay, now when they point back to the TLD servers will have further information, so they can point you to a direction where you will get the IP address. So the root server will point you back to the TLD server in which your domain may be hosted. Okay, the domain that you're trying to access, that may be hosted in one of the domains over here. And one of these domains are what make up these 13 set of root servers. So from the 13, you shortlist one of them, and those come to the resolver. It tries to access the top level domain servers, and these top level domain servers, they store information of these top level domains such as .com or the .net or the .org domains, all these domains, right? So whether it's facebook.com or google.com, those kind of information or details will be present in the top level domain servers. Now, even now, you cannot totally resolve to a particular domain's IP address. Supposing I want to access a particular IP address inside a domain, that I cannot get it here. By this time, the top level domain it only knows this particular domain is hosted under these servers. Okay, so what the TLD will do is it would again return back the particular domain, or let's call it authoritative name server. Okay, the TLD would return this name server back to the resolver. So based on that information, the resolver would again query the authoritative name server. Okay, now the name servers is what knows everything about the domain, including the IP address. So the root server would return back the top level domain servers such as the .com or the .net or the .org, and these top level domain servers, they will return back the domains where your IP address is part of, right? And that is through the authoritative name servers, and that's how things happen. And then the resolver would finally get to the IP address inside your authoritative name server, and finally it would store the IP address in its cache locally for later use. So the next time somebody else is trying to access this website in your through your ISP, then they can instead straight away access that website with the IP address, since it would already be present in the cache. And finally, once it's present in the resolver would send the response back to the local system. So this is how a DNS server works. Okay, now if you guys have understood this part, then you're all set. You can understand exactly how to set up your DNS server, which server to use, right? So speaking of which server, we have a lot of DNS servers available in the market, and what I'm going to use in my session is that of a Bind DNS server. So Bind is one of the most popular and one of the earliest DNS servers which was in use, and it's basically a name server, and it can also be configured for mail service. And I'm going to use Bind. However, you can try out Unbound, or you can try out Power DNS. We have a number of DNS servers. So moving on to how to configure a Bind DNS server, I can show you that in 10 simple steps. Okay, now let's see how we do that. Now that's the next topic, and the 10 steps that are involved are mentioned here, right? And first of all, the most obvious of the steps is this one. You have to install Bind, because Bind is a DNS service, and we'll have to install Bind with the help of yum command in CentOS machines. If you're, however, doing this on a Ubuntu machine, it would be apt get install Bind, right? So this is the first step. The second step would be to add a static IP address. Now, can anybody guess why we add a static IP address to your machine? to the system where you're configuring the DNS server? Anybody? Well, see, the reason for that is because when we reboot our machine, so sometimes if your server crashes and then it reboots, then at that time you don't want your IP address to change, right? So for that purpose, you say boot protocol is static. Okay, so initially by default, when you're trying to configure it for the first time, you'd find DHCP over here. That stands for Dynamic Host Control Protocol, which would assign a dynamic IP address every time you reboot your server. But when you change it to static, then what IP address you set here, this is going to be constant. It's not going to change. Okay, so that's the need to assign a static IP address, and that makes up the second step. And along with these, you need to also add these two lines of net mask and say which subnet it belongs to. Okay, and the gateway. So in my case, my IP address is 192.168.56.2, and this is what I've entered in my H0 file, which is present under this directory, etc sysconfig network scripts, right? And you also add the gateway. Okay, and you add these three lines, and the rest remains the same. And you of course change the H0 file. And moving on, the next step is to assign a fully qualified domain name for your server. Well, what's the point in hosting a domain if you don't want to give a domain name, right? So that's the whole point of assigning it. And you can simply assign a domain name, a fully qualified domain name, by entering this file, the etc sysconfig network file. And you'll have two lines. You'll have networking is equal to yes. This will be a line which would be initially there, and even the host name is equal to followed by the current machine name. That would be the entry initially in your system. Okay, so when you configure it, you can change it with the domain name that you want to give. So in my case, I'm giving dns1.vardhan.com. Okay, so you can change it accordingly. You can do that. So once you've set the fully qualified domain name, the next step is to go to the etc hosts file and add the entry. Okay, this entry you've in your in this file, right, in your networks file, you've added the domain name. You've said this is your host name. Now you're defining an IP address for that host name over here in the hosts file, right? That's the step here. These two lines would be there by default. You don't need to worry about that. And the fifth step would be to go to your resolve.conf file. Okay, this would again be present under the etc directory, and you need to add these two lines. So you need to say search and your domain name. You can ignore the DNS1 part, but you got to put your domain name over here. In your case, it can be anything, but in my case, it's vardhan.com. Otherwise, it can be google.com or yahoo.com. Excuse me, it can be anything like that. And of course, you should say name server and point the IP address which you want to act as the DNS server. Okay. And this is one important step which has to be configured even in the clients, even in your DNS client. Okay, so supposing if I want to check later what is the if my domain name is working, right, that time I will have to go to the resolve.conf file in my client and add this particular line. I will show you that later, right? I will show you that in my demonstration. So just remember that it's a very important step which you need to do even in your clients. In fact, this is the only step that you have to do in your clients, in your DNS client side, right? So then the next step would be to go and edit the named.conf file. So from here onwards is where the actual configuration of bind starts. So till here you were just configuring your own network, the first 5 steps. From the 6th step onwards till the 8th, and in fact even the till the 8th step, it's all about bind DNS. Okay. So this named.conf file is a file that comes when you install bind. Okay. And what you have to do is you have to enter the named.conf file, and you'll have a number of lines there, which of course I can't, I couldn't print all the lines in my slide. So I have just the 3 lines which we have to change. So we have to edit these 3 lines, and the thing is, initially when you open this file, you will have this line, okay, where in curly brackets you would have localhost, like it says here. What you have to do is you have to replace this localhost with your IP address. So in my case, I would be doing it with .52. Sorry, .256.2. That's my IP address, right? And you'll have one more line for pointing to the IPv6 port number, and this you need to comment this. You don't need this line anymore, okay? And the third line which you have to edit is that of allow query, and you will have none initially. You should replace this with any. So that is the 6th step which you have to configure. When you're done with this, you can then go to the other file in the etc, which again the file name is rfc.1912.zones, and this of course comes when you install bind. And here is where you define your zones. Okay, now there are two concepts of forward lookup and reverse lookup, right? So I told you that when you enter the host name and then you hit enter in your browser, then that's called a forward lookup. But however, if you enter the IP address, that's a reverse lookup. So if you want people to query your server either in the forward or the reverse fashion using one of these lookup fashions, so at that time, for that purpose, you have to set up two different zones. So your first zone would have the rules and settings for what should be returned to them when they access you from the forward lookup, and when they access your server through the lookup, through the reverse lookup, then the settings for those would be present under this zone. Okay, so I've just defined that it's I've just defined the forward lookup as my domain name here. As you can see, it's in the form of vardhan.com, which is like a domain name. And for the reverse lookup, of course, it would be from the IP address. So for this reverse lookup, I've said it would be in the form of an IP address, and I've named it as reverse.zone. Okay, and similarly, file would be forward.zone. Okay, now this file, RFC file, this is going to be again a very long file, and you will have a lot of lines there, and this would be placed in there. So you would understand this better when I open the demonstration. So stick around till then, till you understand this completely, because it's a little tricky at this step. Okay. And then moving on to the next point, the next step is the configuring of the forward and the reverse zones. So whatever we have configured over here in step 7, we have created the forward zones here. We have created a new file forward.zone and created a new file reverse.zone. We have to add the rules over here. So that's what you're doing here. You create one and then you open them, and you will have a basic template, and you will have to edit that template and replace that template with your host name and your IP address. In the forward.zone, you would replace the template with your domain name, and in the reverse.zone, you would replace your template with your IP address. So these are the two things that you have to do. And when you do this, your DNS server is well and good. Okay, but however, you might also want to change your group ownership of those two files. Okay, this is a minor step that's needed. You're just setting it root access, full permissions, and yeah, that is the final step. When you do that, you can just restart your named service, and your service would be up and running, right? So these are the 10 different steps which are needed. So I can now get started with my hands-on, right? So let's see how to configure this bind DNS server in 10 simple steps through my demonstration. And for my demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my virtual machine. Okay, so this is my virtual machine. As you can see, I've already set my domain name here. It says dns1.vardhan.com. This is my machine name. So let me just open this up. So first and foremost, let me just check what's my IP address. That's 192.168.56.2. The IP address did not change because I followed my step and I have assigned a static IP address for this, right? So okay guys, so I hope you can see the VM clearly now, right? Now the first thing of course that you would have to do is to install bind, right? So the command for that is sudo yum. Well, what I'll do is I would enter as a sudo user. Okay, yeah, the first command is to do a yum install bind, and I'm going to give asterisk because there are multiple packages that come with bind, so I would want to install all those utilities, especially the one that's chroot and utils package. So when you give asterisk, all the associated packages would be there, and since I have already the latest one installed, I have nothing to do. So the next step would be, let's go back to step number 2, would be to assign a static IP address. So I've done that, and let me just verify that and show it to you once. Okay, so let me open this and show it to you. So I'm going to do a cat command here, or let's do a VM itself. Let's see, sys sysconfig network scripts, and I want to edit my eth0 file. Okay, okay, so 1 minute. Oh yeah, eth0 file. All right, so here we go. These are the settings that I had told you that I had already done. I've assigned my IP address here. I've mentioned it's going to be static. Okay, I've also added these two lines, netmask and gateway, along with my IP address. So this is something that you also have to do. So let me just close this. Now, going to the step 2 is all about assigning assigning a FQDN DN for my server, right? Fully qualified domain name. So that we can do by going to my okay. So as you can see, my host name, of course, it's dns1.vardan.com. You can again change the domain name as per your wish, right? So this is the important thing. And the next step would be to configure the etc/hosts file. Okay, you have to add your whatever domain name that you've created. You have to add the IP address along with that. Okay, so let me just go to my hosts file and show you that I've done the same thing here. I have my IP address and I've also specified my domain name for this particular IP address. Okay, that's done with step number 4. Now going to step number 5, we have to then go to our resolve.conf file. Okay, so our resolve.conf file is again present over here, and as you can see, I've said search vardan.com. Okay, now I've mentioned my domain name, but however, there's one problem over here. The name server is wrong, so it's pointing to 1.1. So let me just change this to my IP address, which I want to set for my name server. And let me also, okay, so I can also comment these two lines. I don't really need these two lines. Okay, so I'm going to comment them out. I'm going to just save and quit. All right, so going back to my step number 6, now is where the whole bind task starts. So bind, like I told you, it's one of the most popular DNS servers, right? So let's edit the named.conf file, which is given by bind. So here we go, and this is the file here, and this was the line that I was talking about. Okay, you would have localhost specified over here, and you'll have to change this with the IP address of the server on which you change it with the IP address of the machine that you want to make your server. Okay, DNS server. In my case, it's my IP address, and you have to comment this line of yours, and then you'll have the allow query, right? So here you have to specify any. So these are the 3 settings that you have to do in your named.conf file. Okay, when you've done this, you can just quit, and then you can go to the next step, that is configuring the rfc.1912.zones. Okay, you define the zones over here. Now okay, so this is the file, the RFC file, and as you can see, this is my this is the thing which is pointing to my forward zone. Okay, I've said vardan.com is my domain, and I've set type master. It's going to be the master. It's not going to be the slave. It's going to be the master over here. And I've said the file name is forward.zone. Okay, when we say file forward.zone, it basically means the settings for the rules that you need to follow, that you need to return, would be present in the file called forward.zone, and this forward.zone would be present in the directory that is var/named. Okay, that is a directory that you can set in your named.conf. So the file that I opened previously, in that we have to set the path. So let me just quickly open back that file and show you what I'm talking about. So over here, along with specifying these three lines, I have something called as directory, right? So whatever files that my DNS bind is going to create, so that it would place it in the /var/named. So even the forward zone and the reverse zones, which I'm going to configure in my RFC, those would be present inside this directory. Okay, so that's why we have written forward.zone, which would be the name of my file. And similarly, explaining the other lines, dump file again over here is where your cache and your logs would be dumped. Okay, and then you have a statistics file where you'll have other details. These are not we don't need to really worry about these details for now. Okay, we just need to verify that it includes the RFC 1912.zones, because you are defining your forward and the reverse zones inside this location. Okay, now going back to the RFC 1912.zones, I explained this part. Okay, now what you have to do is, 1 minute guys. Yeah, sorry for the delay guys. 1 minute. Okay, yeah, so what I was talking about is setting the forward zone. We've done that here. Now we need to go down and you would see the reverse zone right here. Okay, as you can see, when someone queries me with the IP address of my system, that time uh, we are specifying the rules for that in this file called reverse.zone. Okay, and this again would be present in the same directory. And one thing which you would find strange is we have the subnet in the reverse order. Okay, now that's because that's how rules are defined. So you don't this is the only thing that's going to be different. Instead of giving 192.168.56, you would have to give it the other way. You have to first specify the class C, then comes class B, and then class A. Okay, the subnetting order is a little different over here when you specify the reverse dot zone. The reason for that is, in the reverse dot zone, you specify the number of your IP address. So in my case, it's 2. So I've specified the 2 and I've followed that up with the rules. So for that purpose, we specified in this order. Okay, you would understand this better later. Okay, so right now you might get a little confused. So just hang around. So let me just quit and exit this. Now going back to my slides, the next step is to actually create the forward zones and the reverse zones. Okay, and then open them and use the template to basically create a rough forward and reverse zones and then edit them. So now those would be present. Okay, let me first clear the screen guys. Okay, so let me do /var/named, and I can do an ls first. Okay, so as you can see, right now we have something called as named.localhost. Okay, now this is the file that provides the default template. Okay, now the forward.zone and the reverse.zone is what I created based out of this. So using this I created these two files, and let me now show you what I have made changes in these two files. Okay, so this is my forward.zone which I am first editing, and as you can see, we have in the first line it says TTL. So TTL stands for time to live, and we say that as 1 day. Okay, and when we say @, it basically means rules for all. Okay, and IN stands for internet, and SOA stands for state of authority. Now these are a couple of terms which you might not understand when you get started with DNS right away. Okay, so the state of authority, we are giving complete, when we say @ in SOA, we are giving complete authority to this particular domain. Okay, that's what's happening. And right after specifying SOA with the tab space, I have said dns1.vardhan.com. This is my fully qualified domain name to which I'm giving complete authority. Okay, along with that, I'm giving root dot the fully qualified domain name. Now, the one rule which you have to note is, after I give the fully qualified domain name, I finish it with append that with a dot. The same thing goes over here and over here. Okay, This is basically to indicate that your domain is ending. Okay, this is a syntax, so you cannot play around over here. So just make sure that you have a dot, and if there's if there's an error, make sure that you check this, because most of the time errors would be because of failing to give a dot somewhere here. Okay, and these are again set of rules which you don't need to really worry about. These are the rules when something goes down. It's about the backup. Okay, so what you need to just edit is these two lines in your forward dot zone. When I've said, again, which stands for internet, I've said that the forward dot zone over here would act as a name server. Okay, so I'm setting up my bind as a name server, which would basically resolve IP addresses and host names. Okay, so NS stands for name server. If you want to configure a mail service over here, then you can replace NS with MX, and similarly other options. Okay, with bind, of course, you have these two options, and I've added name server, and I've said my server is dns1.vardhan.com. Okay, and the domain, the DNS1, I've given the IP address of 192.168.56.2. Okay, so whenever this domain is queried, then the address for that query over here is the server. Okay, the server address would be 192.168.56.2. so that's what the forward zone does. Now let me just quickly exit this and open my reverse zone, and here the only difference that you would see is the last line over here. Okay, so the other rules are the same. You're saying complete state of authority to your domain name here, and then these rules are the same, and you're also defining the name server for dns1.vardhan.com, which is my domain name, but instead of ye we have ptr. So ye over there stands for address, right? That's pointing to your address, but when you say ptr, it's basically pointing to your IP address. So because it's a reverse lookup, right? So from your IP address, it's looking up to your domain name. So that's why we replace this with ptr. This is the syntax. So you say ptr, and then you give the if it's 56.2 in my case, so I've given 2 over here. Okay, now some of you might have had a doubt why I gave that in reverse, 192.168.56. so that's because the rules start from here, so it's 2.56.168.192. so it would look up in that fashion, right? So now I hope now you would have understood why I did that, and yeah, it's pretty much it, and this is all that's needed to set up your DNS server. Okay, so let me just quit this again, and I want to clear the screen. So the 9th step that needs to be done is that of changing the group ownership of these two files. Okay, you give them complete root access. This is something that I've already done, so I don't need to brush up on this. And finally, the 10th step is to restart your named service. Okay, now let me just apply the command for that. Okay, so service namely restart. This is a command to restart my service, and it says it's stopping my service. Okay, and it started my name service. Great. Now to check if our connection is up and running, we can do a dig command, which basically digs for our name service, and as you can see, it says that the status, there's no error, and it's giving you all these details. But to understand better, you need to just look at this particular server, if this is coming perfectly, right? So the server that you set your DNS service for is this one, 192.168.56.2. so that is coming up here. It's perfect, and it also says it's under port 53 as we suggested. Now you can verify this in another way by supplying this command, ns lookup command, and specify the domain name. In my case, it's dns1.vardhan.com. So when I hit enter, you can see that it says the server is my IP address, the address where it's hosted is port number 53 inside the same IP address, and the domain name is this, and my IP address. Now similarly, when I do a reverse lookup, I can do a 192.168.56.2. When I do this, it returns me my domain name again, right? So this is the server, this is the port number and where it's running, and the lookup done in reverse fashion, right? And it's pointing to my correct domain name. So this is what a DNS server does. So this is how you set up a DNS server, guys. Now some of you might have a doubt as to, okay, we are doing the lookup from the server, that's why we are getting to see the details, the correct details here. No, right? So you're not having a verification, you don't have a verification as to if you can actually see this domain name from other systems also. Now to answer that question, I can show it to you from a different VM. So this is one VM. I can go to my second VM here, right? And let me open up my terminal first of all. Okay, I'm going to do an if config, and yeah, this is my IP address of this VM. Okay, now let's see if this from this VM, if I do a reverse lookup, if I do a lookup to my domain name, let's see if it's pointing to the correct address, right? You guys notice that this has a different IP address, right? Now let me supply the same command, ns lookup, and say my my domain name here, vardhan.com. Okay, and when I hit enter, okay, so it's giving an invalid address. Now that's because we have not set the name server, right? So there was one point number 6 which I told you that we had to do even on your client side. Now it is this point, this one, right, where you configure the resolve.conf file. You have to set the name server which you want your system to look up to. So that is what you have to do over here. So at every client, if you want to resolve the domain name, you have to do that, and the command for that is resolve.conf. Okay, and there goes the password. As you can see, we have the default ones over here. Now let me first comment these 2 lines and change the IP address over here and point it to my name server. So my name server, my DNS name server is 56.2. Save and exit. Now if I supply the same command, ns lookup command, now you can see that it's pointing to my IP address, and it says the port number where it's hosted is 53, and it's resolving my domain name, and this is the address. From here, let's check even the reverse lookup. Okay, and when you do that, the reverse lookup also works exactly the way we wanted, correct? So it's pointing to my domain name, and yeah, that's how this works, guys. So that's how you set up a DNS server, and this is a simple 10-step process. It's actually not that simple when you try it for the first time, and yeah, a lot of people break their heads trying to configure the DNS, and probably if you have to do it anytime in the future, hopefully this video helps, and all the best, guys. So try doing this in this way, and you will have a very easy way out, right? So let me just go back to my slides, and I can finish my session, right? I can conclude today's session. So I first of all spoke about what is DNS, guys. That was my first topic. Then I told you how DNS works, how the DNS server looks for the IP addresses with the help of the hierarchical name servers present throughout the world, and then the simple 10-step process to creating your bind DNS server, and I give you a hands-on demonstration of the same, right? So this was what I covered in the session today. And yeah, that pretty much brings us to the end of my session. So guys, can you see my Chrome window here? Yeah. So the thing is, we have a Linux training certification at Edureka. If you're looking for a structured training and learn various concepts of Linux administration, then you can definitely check out our course at this link, at this URL, edureka.co/linuxadmin. And you can see that you will find the price details, you'll find the curriculum, you can find all the details over here. You can contact our sales team, and it would probably help you to grow your career. And guys, since you people have stayed for so long in the session, we have I want to introduce you to this option, okay, this opportunity for you to get a discount in our course. So whatever uh, course that you want to buy, you will get at a discount, at a premium compared to other people. So other people don't get it. Now since you've stayed for so long in this video, only you people would be eligible for this if you enter the form over here at this URL. Okay, do note the URL. It's resources.edureka.co/edureka live course offer. Okay, hit the URL and you would find that you'll find a form over here, and you fill in the form. Then you would be eligible for a special discount whenever you're buying a course. Well, if you're buying Linux, then you'd get an opportunity to get it at a cheaper price than the other people. Okay, so that's the benefit of attending our live session completely. So that's it. And one more thing I want to tell you people is that if you guys do want to be notified of future live sessions, then do hit the bell icon over here. Okay, so on any of our Edureka videos, if you just open them, you will get the subscribe option, right? So after you subscribe, you will get a bell icon. So this would help you get notifications over here. Okay, so this would come you good, and we have a lot of live sessions coming up. We've planned a lot. Probably we can teach you a lot, and hopefully you learn a lot from our sessions, guys. Okay, you can check that out here, and you can also check out our Linux playlist, Linux administration playlist. Okay, we have a number of videos. The lab itself recorded a number of videos here. We've covered various networking concepts, the basics of Linux. So if you're completely new to Linux, then these first 3 videos here, these would be more than enough for you to get started, right? You'll have a fair enough understanding of how Linux is, and you can prepare yourself for the Red Hat certification. Okay, so that's about the session. Those are the details that I wanted to convey to you people. And thank you for being in the session. Thank you for being ever so patient till the very end. So we will come up with more live sessions, guys. Do subscribe to our channel, like, comment, and share our videos, and it will be a pleasure to have you on board with us. And thanks once again, and happy learning. Spread the learning, guys. Thank you.